Hey guys, welcome back. I know this formatting isn't the most popular since we tend to be a much more visual society, but I just had a really interesting experience and I had to take a voice recording to remember it for myself, and I thought I should probably just post this. So you're going to get this without any processing, any additional editing. It's just in the raw. And the purpose of it is just to give my thoughts on what faith is, especially since I know a lot of people, for good reason, have had issues with the word faith. It seems to be just such a politically, religiously, emotionally fraught word. And I get it. And the reason why I'm such a big fan of using the word faith is because of the experiences that I've had in my life. And so I figured I would just give you guys this excerpt of a rant to myself, but that now you get to listen to as well. Like if you want unedited, raw Dara, here she is. If this is something that you found interesting and you'd want me to do a different video on it, or an actual like face-to-face using my face kind of video, please let me know. But anyway, happy listening. Okay. This is me doing the best that I can to describe faith for me. And it's going to be tough, but I'm going to see what I can do. So it comes with a lot of humility. I just hate the connotation of that word. I'm not trying to be boastful. I'm realizing I was wrong for so long. And that's what's led me to see faith the way that I do now. So my parents split up when I was 9. I was angry with my dad because he's the one that instigated it. And even though my parents did a stupendous job, absolutely stupendous, of making sure that my dad was still accessible to me, even though he wasn't living in my same house, I had a daddy-daughter date with him like once a week. We spent a lot of time with him. He was always accessible to me. I was just so angry with him, and at 9 years old, I was so devastated that he would walk away from my mother. And every time somebody would make a comment on me, they would say, "Oh my gosh, you're just like your mom." And they meant it as a compliment, I know, but they didn't know that I immediately associated that with, so my dad doesn't love me. I'm unwanted. No man's going to want me. Got it. And because that had embedded when I was so young, I construed everything in my relationship with my dad skewed to that what I considered to be the truth. He didn't want me. That was the truth. Because I was like my mom. He left my mom. He didn't want her. He didn't want me. And even though I can look back on that now and see that was incredibly reductive, I also understand that as a 9-year-old, I couldn't formulate anything more nuanced or sophisticated. I physically couldn't. So, and because it happened when I was so young and was traumatizing enough to embed in like my brain stem, that was just the operating system I went about viewing the world and my father with. So everything that I encountered with my father after that point of 9 years old was evidence for something. It was because it was evidence for the fact that he didn't want me. It never uprooted that truth. Him leaving was the truth. What greater evidence do you need, you know? And so he would, throughout the years, he would do those weekly daddy-daughter dates with me. They would usually be very awkward for me. I'm pretty good at people-pleasing and pretending, so I would pretend. But on the inside, I was like almost always distressed at being alone with my dad because I was sure he didn't want me. So it was just always uncomfortable. We'd go to movies. He'd come to my basketball games. He came to my band performances, yada, yada, yada. And all of that time, every time that he would come, I'd think, why is he even here? He doesn't want me. So I construed a different series of theories based off of his behavior that said, he's doing this because he wants to pat himself on the back and say, I'm a good dad. I show up for my kids, but he doesn't actually love me. He's just doing it out of duty. That was the thesis that I came to. Once again, this is all operating subconsciously. It's only been as an adult that I can even articulate in words what I was feeling, but that's what I felt. Every time he came and did something, every time he would give me a hug, every time that he'd try to do something good for me or give me a compliment, it never uprooted the, you didn't want me. And so it therefore became evidence for, you're just doing this because you want to feel like a good dad. And that escalated even further. I moved away to Tennessee when my mom married my stepdad. He bought me a cell phone. And at 14 years old back then, it was really unusual for a 14-year-old to have a cell phone. It was kind of special because I could text and call him. That's why he bought it for me. And he paid for the plan so that he could call me whenever and we could stay connected, even though I was several states away. That didn't matter. That didn't uproot the belief that he didn't want me. So it went into the category of he's just doing this because he wants to feel like a good dad. And every phone call only serviced that evidence. It said, because he's awkward on the phone. He would call me and he would tell me about things going on in his life. He would never ask me what life was like for me. And even if he had, it would take so much more prodding for me to begin to trust him, to even be honest and say things are like shit right now. I would never have admitted that to him. So it would be like at least, or at most, a 10-minute long conversation, him telling me about his hobbies. World of Warcraft was one of them, and he would tell me how well he was doing in World of Warcraft. I had played it with him before. That was like the one bonding thing that he could milk, and so he milked it. And then he'd also tell me about how well work was going for him, the FHE that he did with his family, and then he'd just really awkwardly be like, okay, bye, and end the phone call abruptly. And I've talked with my brothers and they all say he just does that. That's just him. On the phone, he's not the most eloquent person. So anyway, because he would never inquire about me or do the things that I would expect a dad who cared to do, then that, once again, all just was evidence for the fact he's just trying to be a good dad because he wants to pat himself on the back. He doesn't actually care about me. He left me. He doesn't want me. And then I went to college. He bought me a laptop. Same thing. I was in college for a little bit. He bought me a car, and it was a really junky car. It was like $1,300, missing some cylinders. I had to go fly down to Texas to get it. I didn't have enough money to even be able to cover the insurance costs, so he was covering that for me. And then 6 months later, had to remove me off of the insurance and didn't tell me. And it was a pain. It was like nice to have a car, but also a pain to have a car. So it was just this mixed bag of like, why on earth are you giving me what you think is a gift? Once again, obviously you're just doing this because you want to feel like a good dad, because you don't want me. You just want other people to think you're doing okay and you're making up for what you've done. That's what I was thinking. Went on my mission and realized there that I was going into sort of traumatic mode around male authority figures. My mission president was spectacular for me because he was very hands off. If he had been much more involved, I would have had a real problem. And I was really grateful to my district leaders and my zone leaders. I had issue with them giving me any instructions whatsoever, ever. And that's what clued me into being like, I have an authority problem. And I think it comes from my dad. So that's when I really started. When I came home, I recognized this is not normal behavior to go into like just a few stages short of PTS, a post-traumatic stress response. Being alone with a man is not normal. So I need to work on this. And I had an ethics class where we read the book, The Bonds That Make Us Free, and it helped me see I was perpetuating this victim narrative in my mind. I was never moving on and letting my dad prove anything different to me because I needed to be a victim of what he did. And I was putting everything into the evidence that I'm a victim. He doesn't actually want me. He is just doing this because he wants to be a good dad. He couldn't possibly love me after what he's done. So that class and that book made me confront the victim narrative in my head. Enough to say, okay, I don't know what the truth is, but I do know that I'm blaming him for me running out on him after he left. I emotionally left that relationship. So I can own that. I'm going to own that and say, that's my fault. I'm not actually a victim. My life is actually quite good. And even though there were things that he did that have impacted me, and honestly, they still do, I can't blame him for the choices that I make at this point. It's not his fault anymore. It's on me. And since then, for several years, I have been able to rebuild this relationship with him, which for, years, there was no trust there. It was there was anti-trust there. So I had to start small with first telling him how bad him leaving had hurt me. That was a big step for me. And I had to let him know, you never should have done that. And tell him how I really felt, that that was the worst thing you could have ever done to me. And letting him know I wanted to tell you this because I want to start telling you what I actually think and feel. Because I can't build trust with someone if I never give them the chance. So that was step 1. Step 2 was, I forgive you. Step 3 was, okay, what matters to you or what happens to you kind of does matter to me. I can't pretend that I'm apathetic towards you anymore. And then after those 3 steps were done, then I was in a position to try small ways of reaching out to him and asking for small things so that I could potentially start to build trust with him. And it was small things like, yeah, I'm going on a date with this guy and I'm a little nervous. And then he gave me advice. And his advice was crap, absolute crap. And so I went, whatever, Dad. And I'd hang up and I'd be like, that was the dumbest thing you could have ever told me. This is why I shouldn't trust him. Like this was so long and hard won. And it wasn't until several years later when I remembered that dumb advice and I realized I was doing exactly what he had advised me to do. And I went, oh my gosh, he was right. He was right. And I just didn't see it. And so several years of rebuilding trust with him, with actually trying to talk with him, with trying to understand, oh, okay, so it's not him saying that he doesn't love me. He's just bad on the phone. Got it. Okay, so I shouldn't worry about him curtailing the phone call preemptively after 10 minutes. That's just him. Okay, I can handle that. And so it was a hard fight to get to a position where I could see things a little bit from his perspective. He'd been open enough to admit to me that the reasons why he left my mom once I was like in my late 20s. And then I started to look back and see and just consider the possibility of maybe he bought me that 2003 Chrysler Town and Country because he actually does care about me. Maybe. We're not going so far as to say that's true. I'm just saying maybe. And with that, I started to notice other ways that he was interacting with me. The phone calls, the gifts that he would give me over Christmas. And he'd started to get better too after I gave him some feedback of like, your phone calls are so awkward. Then he finally started to do the things that I needed from him. And I didn't actually even have to ask him to do those specifically. All I would say is, yeah, I didn't always feel loved as a kid. Or it just is really nice when someone asks how I'm doing. And he would hear those small things and then he would immediately start implementing them. It was just the fact that I didn't never confide in him what I needed, that he would never give me what I needed. Because now, here he is, he texts me out of the blue all the time saying, man, I am so proud to be your dad. I love you. And now I'm at the point where there's been enough instances of those things that I believe him. So all of that is to say, in a really long-winded fashion, that faith has changed for me. I look now at what Scripture puts forth. It says, faith is evidence of things not seen. And I'd always be like, oh, that's so annoying. I hate not being able to see things because, trust issues went deep within me. And I would behave and interact in relationships where if I can't see it, then I won't believe it. Well, I actually was going so far as to say, even if I do see it, I won't believe it. And I was treating not only my dad that way, but my brothers and any man who tried to go on a date with me. I remember being on a date with a guy in our ward who I thought was attractive, and he was fun to talk to, and he was kind of a joker. And I was like, man, I like this guy, but this can't be true. The other shoe's got to drop. He doesn't actually like me. He just asked me out on a date because he needed something to do tonight. Or I thought it was originally he was asking me out on a group date and he just needed a date, So even when I had evidence, because I showed up to that date and it was just him and he wanted to know what I wanted to do, and he was like flirtatious, and I was like, what is going on? Because in my mind, there was no way he actually was interested in me. So I had to come up with other reasons behind his behavior for his motivation. So when I look at faith, I look at it purely as a relational term. There is no other context in which faith makes sense, because you can never see someone's emotions. You can never see someone's full thought process. Though we can get to know each other really well and become familiar and be able to like read expressions, you can never conclusively know why someone did something that they did. With all the brain scans in the world, with all of the empirical data you might be able to collect, you can't prove it. Just like you can't prove that someone loves you. You can't. You have to take that on trust. You have to believe it. You have to believe in what you can't see. Which to me, that's how relationships function. So when I hear people use that language of unless I meet someone, I won't believe it. Unless I see it, if it's not part of my five senses, it can't be proven. It's illogical. It's not reasonable. I'm with you. Like, you can't. Love is not logical. It's not reasonable. You can't prove it. And that's precisely the point. You have to just experience it. And when you experience it, then you see how real it is. Wow, that was really long, and I don't even know if I fully articulated it well. Whoops. And I know this is a really clunky way to say this in summation. I know it doesn't make any kind of actual logical sense. I know this. And I know there are holes in the argument, I will say. But in my heart, I know God's real like I know my dad loves me. Now, there is no question in my mind and in my heart that my dad loves me. None. Once there was. Once I wrote away the evidence and I said, there's some other reason why he's behaving the way that he is. But once I conceded that maybe it was possible that he loved me, then I started to see, so that evidence that I had for the fact that he was just being dutiful, that actually was evidence that he does care about me, that he loves me. He made a mistake and he owned it. Many times he's told me, man, that was the biggest regret of my life, leaving your mom. So I believe him, and I believe him because he does things like reaches out to me without me ever asking him to. He is thinking of me. He makes things for me. He buys me gifts. He wants to know how my day goes. He says that he's proud of me. He watches the YouTube videos that I create. He is invested. He is a part of my life without me even asking him to. He voluntarily is a part of my life. And because I believe my dad loves me, I believe his love exists, I can believe that God exists, that God loves me, that God is a father, that he is invested in my well-being. And that opens me up to be able to understand what is he like, which is the position that I'm in with my father. Now that I've laid the groundwork that says my dad loves me, I get to just enjoy the process of finding out what is he like. Because when we're kids, we don't see what our parents are like in their full glory. We see them as somebody who's a means to taking care of me. They're kind of a means to an end until we mature to a certain degree. And so now, the function of my faith, my belief in something that I can't see, is for joy and for connection. It's not proving anything. It's to experience and be embraced. So there's just so much imperfection in the way that I've described things. I know, but it's one of those things where now I get it, that like I used to rebel against the idea of trust, period. Everything had to be proven. And really, when I look back, really, I was saying nothing can prove it. Nothing can prove it. Because even when I had evidence, like the car that my dad bought me, I wrote it off and I said that was not evidence. So, yeah, I just have heard a lot of people talk in different varying degrees of evidence, of reasonableness, of support. And they always say, well, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of people always say it's not reasonable because there's not enough evidence. And they consider evidence to be rigorous, multiple studies, unbiased, free from emotion. And that's precisely the point where you can never get evidence. Because God is emotion. That is how we're connected to him. There is no way to prove him, to know him without emotion. There isn't. And yeah, our emotions can lie. So the only way you can know him is by trial and error and trust. It's the only way. And it's the same, I think, for every relationship that we have with another person. We do not know their inner world. We can't prove anything. All we can do is interact in connection with them to varying degrees of trust. Okay, I think I've said my piece.